Hi everyone, Andrew here with AGL Mechanical Tips, and today I'm going to show you how to insulate round pipe using fiberglass duct wrap. Before we get started, there's a couple things I'd like to go over, the biggest thing being the tools you're using. The staple gun being used is an outward clinch model. This is not a standard staple gun that shoots straight staples. It flares these staples outward and into the fiberglass insulation. It does not shoot through the sheet metal duct. Before I get started, I want to discuss assembly line process, and we need to have a plan to what we're going to wrap rather than just wrapping a bunch of 5-foot sections and hoping that we use them. So with every HVAC job, you should have a set of blueprints or something. I'm going to use a whiteboard for now just for the purposes of this video, but let's say that we have a regular house here, and let's just say that there's an air handler parked on one side of that house, and we have a straight trunk line running through this building here. Before we start figuring out what sections of pipe we want to wrap, we need to determine a few things. One, how big of a section of pipe can we actually physically get into this attic? Because if we can insulate this stuff in 10-foot sections, it's going to be a lot more efficient than throwing a bunch of 5-foot sections of duct into the attic and then making all these connections in the attic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my basic layout. Let's say that we have straight trunk line here. It starts off with 16-inch round pipe, reduces to 12-inch round pipe, and let's just say it reduces to 10-inch round pipe. All right, and then I'm going to measure all this out. Let's say I can get 10-footers in this attic. So I'm going to start with my list of fittings I'm going to insulate. Well, at the air handler, I need a squared around, which is specific to this job, but let's just say it's a 16-inch round squared around, right? And I pull a measurement from here to here. Say I come up with 10 foot. All right, so I need, 16 actually comes in 3-foot sticks. So we're gonna put 9 foot, a 16-inch round. And I'm gonna go ahead and attach my reducer to that section of 16-inch pipe. So I'm gonna put with reducer, right? And let's say I pull a measurement from here to here, got 10 foot of 12. All right, so I need 10 foot, 12-inch round pipe with a reducer. Then lastly, I got my 10 foot or 10. I can go ahead and put an end cap on that with end cap. So keep in mind, you can also do other things. Let's say that this trunk line turns at the end. Insulate an elbow in an attic and all and making a connection can get kind of difficult. So we could do a 10 footer of 10 with an elbow turning right. So I can do 10 foot of 10 with elbow right. And the reason that right matters is because I want my seam on the top turning right. So I'm going with the airflow. So that's assembly line process. This will make things run a little bit more efficiently, just having a clear, concise list on what you're doing. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, we discussed assembly line process, and moving further with that, we're now at the part where I'm gonna start showing you all how to insulate duct. And I've already made a list of everything I'm gonna insulate. I've already gotten all my tools together. I've got all my materials together. So I'm gonna start with the assembly line process. We're gonna do a 10 footer of 12, and we're gonna do a 10 footer of 14 with the reducer. So I've already got 10 foot of 14 and 10 footer of 12 here to be snapped together all at one time. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're going to snap our pipe together. Again, snapping the whole job at one time. Do this by starting at the crimp side, keeping it nice and straight, and moving down the pipe until it snaps together. So this is pipe lock seam here, and it basically locks together. You want to line up your crimped end and start at the very top. You can almost get that started there. You can work your way down the pipe, keeping some pressure. This takes a lot of practice. So it's not something that you're just going to be able to do on your first run. I'm also using my legs here to pinch that pipe as I line it up. We're going to go over how to crimp a reducer properly. I'm going to be screwing all this off at one time, so I figured I would go ahead and crimp it and put it on the pipe before I do all my screwing process, so that I stay with my assembly line process that I keep bringing up. So crimp is very simple. I always like to do 2 up on my crimpers. I don't think it really matters because you're regardless making the pipe invert, regardless of how this tool is put on here. But one thing I see commonly done wrong is that everybody feels that they need to crimp every single section of this reducer, which is wrong. It's just outright wrong. But really I do a crimp and then a 2-inch gap, crimp, 2-inch gap, crimp, 2-inch gap. And I just do that really fast. And I'll explain why I have a 2-inch gap here in a minute. So this is a crimp reducer. The diameter of this pipe is now smaller. It is no longer 12 inches. It's probably something like 11 3/4. If you were to over crimp a fitting, like this one is already over crimped, but I'm gonna get extreme and crimp it how I've seen people who are new do it. There's actually 2 things wrong with this. One, it is not going the right direction with airflow. We don't want the air stream coming this way and catching on this lip. 2, it is over crimped. So when I go to hook it up to this fitting, yes, it's gonna slide in very easily, but when I go to screw this off, this material is so far pressed in, it's not gonna easily screw. I haven't screwed anything yet. If I space my crimps like this, it'll still be tight to my duct, and when I go to make a connection, the screw will go right through both pieces of material. And that's where that belongs. I don't wear a tool bag personally, mainly because I'm bending over constantly and tools fall out. So what I do, just something that I like to do, I like to put my screws in my back left pocket. I like a drill with a clip on it to where it can stay right there. And I'm gonna start screwing my duct. So the most important thing about this is there's a seam here, and with the crimp going this way, I actually need to be the right side of that seam, but very close to the seam. And then also I need to stay at least 2 inches back, because when a pipe goes to connect to another piece of pipe, it will hit the screw if you didn't go back far enough. I'll get in depth on that here in a second, but I'm gonna go ahead and screw this on the right side. I'm actually 3 inches back, which is perfect. You can see there where that screw went in. It is picking up on both pieces of sheet metal. And I'm actually gonna do 3 screws on this. Now, if we're in non-conditioned space, we have to use mastic tape or duct tape with mastic over it. So I'm not gonna get into thermal envelopes on this video, but if we were in a spray foam encapsulated attic, duct tape would be okay because any leakage is technically leaking into conditioned space. But for the purpose of this, let's say that we're doing a crawl space duct system, it's non-conditioned space. I'm gonna use this hard cast 1402 mastic tape, which is the equivalent of duct tape with mastic over it. So I'm gonna measure my piece of tape out. I'm gonna tear it, and I'm gonna rip it. This is what I call a gore here. These need to be taped. And I will come back with a squeegee. So I'm doing assembly line process, so I'm gonna go ahead and rip myself 3 5-footers at one time. Why not? I use a squeegee here to press this tape down good, make sure it's got a good connection. All right, so for the purpose of this video, I didn't put this pipe together, but because I didn't, I'm now gonna lose just a little bit of time having to get tape, having to grab my drill and kind of just resetting what I'm doing. No big deal, I'm just bringing that up. So when we connect this pipe together, we wanna line the seams up. Even though it's being insulated, we'll know where the seam is later if we keep everything together, you know, in the same area. So I'm gonna slide this pipe down this crimp here. I'm gonna look at the distance between this bead and this pipe, and I'm gonna try to keep this distance continuous as I'm screwing it off. That way the pipe remains straight. So I'm looking here, I got about a 1/4 inch in between that bead and where the end of my other pipe is. So when I come over here to my next screw, I'm gonna make it about a 1/4 inch as well. I'm just estimating. Now, if the pipe's really good and fabricated properly, it will actually join all the way up to the bead, but it wasn't crimped as well as it should have been, which is pretty typical with today's metal. I've got that 1/4 inch gap about right here as well. And I'm gonna back up from it, see if it looks straight. And another quick trick that you can do is just roll that pipe. If it's not straight, it's gonna roll odd. So that looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and tape that joint. And that's it for that. All right, so here's a quick tip you won't find in any book. This is a perfect trash bag. So when I unpack my fiberglass, I'm gonna open it up right from the lid, and I'm gonna pull my insulation out of it. And now I've got a perfectly good trash bag to keep up with all my cuttings. All right, so I've got my material out, ready to start cutting patterns for my duct sizes. One thing I want to mention is on a new roll of insulation, this actually came out real good, but you see how there's a little tear here? If you open up a brand new roll and from it being shipped and all, this got all torn up and all, just cut it off and discard it. I know that seems wasteful, but it's gonna be much more wasteful if it starts condensation and ruins the entire duct system. All right, so now I'm gonna cut patterns for my duct. This is 3-inch insulation, so the pattern sizes that I'm giving you will be different if you're using 2.2 inch or 2-inch insulation, but we only use 3-inch in my region. And I'll put those pattern sizes right here on the screen, or right here, or just put it on the whole screen. All right, 12-inch pipe has a pattern size of 44 inches plus your 2-inch lip, so 46 inches total. So I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna mark out 44 inches from the edge of my lip. And I'm just gonna use scissors to kind of give myself a guide here to where I have a straight edge. And also, when you start doing this, I actually don't measure this anymore, 12-inch. I just know 12 inches is 4 inches off the sheet. And I normally just start cutting 4 inches off the sheet. So I got a couple dash marks here. Then I'm going to connect these. All right, now I got to cut the length of my pattern. I start my insulation at this bead right here, and I'm going to end like a 1/4 inch past the female side of this duct. I'm doing that to where when I connect this duct to another duct, I don't need a strip out, or I don't need to add insulation. They're gonna seamlessly join together. So I'm just, instead of measuring that, I'm gonna line that bead up here. I'm gonna come to the back of my pipe. I'm gonna be about, I don't know, 1/4, 1/2 inch past that bead. And I am just going to simply mark a straight line. This is all rough. You don't need a frame and square. And I'll cut this out. All right, now I want to go ahead and cut. If I had, let's say 3 10-footers of 12-inch pipe, I'm going to go ahead and cut 3 patterns so that I don't have to keep coming back and cutting patterns. I'll go ahead and cut all this, have it all laid out, all my pipe laying on top of it, and I'll staple it together all at one time. But before I go and cut 2 more patterns, Let me just double check and make sure I didn't make an error with my pattern size and end up cutting 3 patterns that are wrong. So I'm gonna do a real quick test fit and make sure that this is the right, you know, if I cut it the right length and all. And this all looks good. So if I had 2 more 10-footers to do, I would go ahead and cut 2 more patterns. I'd have them laid out with pipe on top of it before I moved on to the next step. All right, this is a Bostitch T6802 stapler. It's very important that you get the right kind of staple gun. This is an outward clinch stapler. It does not shoot a straight staple. One thing I also want to show you with this is a new staple gun here. This is a used staple gun. And I've got staples from each staple gun here. This is the newer staple gun that is shot, you know, it hasn't put a bunch of staples through it. And this is the one that's starting to get fairly worn and due for a new head. What I'm getting at here is after shooting a couple 100,000 staples, which you will if you're in this industry, the head on this will end up actually shooting a more straight staple just from wear and tear. You can get replacement heads, and it's important for you to keep up with them. If you start hearing a ting noise like that, your staple gun head is starting to go out. It's not flaring out long enough. It's starting to hit the actual duct. So just keep that in mind and, you know, keep your maintenance up on your tools. All right, so now we're gonna start stapling our duct. Couple quick things. You wanna keep your ductwork seam and your insulation seams lined up so that later when you're cutting takeoffs into this piece, you'll know where your seam's at and you won't cut a takeoff into the seam. Now there might be a specific situation where you actually wanna come off the top of the duct with takeoffs and you decide to invert the seam, but as long as you know where it's at and know there's a reason for doing it, that's okay. I'm gonna start from the middle of my duct here, and I actually roll this duct this way, grab the insulation, and then roll here, grab the insulation here. And I'm now ready to start stapling. This takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but the point here is we're not trying to get this as tight as we possibly can. In fact, it needs to be loose to some extent for the insulation to have the correct R value. The manufacturer actually outlines a looser pattern size. I don't like it because I've seen instances where there's air in between the pipe and the fiberglass, which starts duct sweating. And I haven't had any issues with the way I'm doing it now. I'm not going to change it. So I'm going to start right in the middle. And I'm making sure that my fiberglass is meeting the other piece of fiberglass, but I'm not going super tight here. The middle is always the hardest. I'm gonna start by popping 6 staples right in the middle, and I'm holding my staple gun perpendicular, or the staples are going in parallel, but I'm holding my staple gun perpendicular. So now that I've got that start there, it looks kind of rough, but we'll get it straightened out. I'm gonna move about a foot forward. And every time I move forward, I'm gonna grab the insulation down low and pull up a little bit like this and get some of these ripples at the bottom out. When I'm pulling up, I'm actually coming at an angle, going like this, grabbing this lip, and then I'm lining all this up. So again, I'm not trying to get this as tight as I can. I'm trying to keep it consistent. So what I also have is I've got these lines in the insulation. I'm gonna keep it parallel with the line that I see here all the way down when I'm stapling. So I'm right here. I'm gonna pop 2 to start, it's just my preference. And then I'm popping a staple about every 1.5 inches or so. Then I'm gonna move up a foot. I'm gonna grab the bottom. I'm gonna pull my ripples. I'm using my legs here to stop the pipe from sliding. I'm doing this. Pop 2 staples to hold it. Then I'm working my way back. You see, I don't have to hold it anymore after I pop my 2 staples over here. That's why I do that, because I pop my 2 staples, then I guide myself back. So I'm doing this really slow for the purpose of this video, but when I flip around, I'll do it how I normally do it in real time. Give you all an idea. Again, 1 or 2 foot, move forward. Do that. So I'm at the end of my duct now. I'm gonna actually do that one more time. I might put a pole right there. I'm lining up my vapor barrier with my seam here. Now that that side's done, I'm gonna move to the other side, but before I start here in the middle, I like to come to this end. I put my foot on the duct here to stop the sheet metal pipe from moving, and I will grab the insulation low and I'll pull just a little bit. What I'm doing is I'm helping some of these ripples come out. Then I'm gonna spin around here. I'm gonna continue down here. Here's my middle, moving up a foot and a half. Of course, this is exactly the same as the other side. At the end here, I always tend to wrap my hand around that pipe. I don't know why, it tightens it up, it's comfortable to me. All right, now after I staple, but before I tape, if you notice, it's really not that bad, but there's a little bit of ripples down here on this duct. What I like to do before I tape, I'm just gonna gentle slap all the way down, starting from the middle that way. I'm gonna turn around. All right, so all that's left now is to tape the seam. I'm gonna use Nashua Model 365. It does make a difference what duct tape you're using. We actually use this a lot during like mild weather, not very hot. This stuff is great, it's very sticky. The problem is if you get it in the middle of summer when it's 100 degrees and you're in a hot attic, it'll get so sticky that you can't work with it anymore. I'm gonna just tape this seam, starting here. I'm rubbing it in. I'm keeping it perfectly straight. I'm trying to cover up all my staples and the seam. You can't have any staples exposed because when they get any condensation on them, they will rust. I'm also not pulling tight. I'm gonna give myself some tension here like this, and I'm gonna lay this down. Tension, lay it down. Cut it right here at the end. And then I'm gonna actually use a squeegee here. Now let's say that you were stapling it and you ripped the seam and damaged the seam. That doesn't mean that this pattern's ruined, but you have to staple everything. So let's say that the seam ripped, you had to add a seam, and you're just using duct tape to hold that piece together for now. Like let's say I use this piece of duct tape to make a seam to hold the duct together. I can do that, but I have to staple it on both sides. When this little section of tape gets hot in an attic, it'll start melting, and if it's not stapled, this whole duct will start separating. You can do this, but you just have to cover it up afterwards like that. Now we've got our ductwork insulated, we've got it taped. We need to make a decision. If this duct is getting hung today, I'm not gonna mastic it right now because it needs dry time, but if I can stage my job so that I can prep all my ductwork today, mastic all my ductwork today, then when I come in tomorrow, I have dry ductwork. I can then hang it, and one process has already been done here rather than in an attic where it's harder to work. I have to bring up something. This is a fiberglass mesh tape. Some manufacturers with this mastic require this to be put over the duct tape. I don't do it with certain products, and I don't even have a supply house in my area that sells this kind of stuff. So I just figured I'd bring that up because I'm not using it. Everyone here knows how to paint, but I often see this done wrong. And what I see done wrong actually is this goes on thin. People like to paint it super thin. And the proper way of doing it is to add a decent amount and then spread it. But I'm not pressing real hard. When we get the right consistency on this, we can't see where the duct tape starts and stops. If you can, it's too thin. All right, when you're masticing, it's a good idea to stop and leave yourself some room here for your next connection. Duct tape does not adhere well to the mastic, so let's just leave this unpainted, and we'll come back to that and mastic it whenever we mastic the seam that's gonna eventually be here. All right, so when I went over pattern sizes, I discussed where to start your pattern, which is this bead. After wrapping this duct a little bit, it shifted a little bit. It's really not a lot to be concerned about, but I'm just gonna show you. If it did shift more, you would be able to just simply put your hand right here, grab this insulation here, and push the pipe in it. It lines you up right on that bead. Now the reason I did that is when I go to make a connection here later, I've got this slightly over wrapped about 1/4 inch. This is wrapped right to the bead. So after this mastic dries, I'm in the attic, I hook this up. I can actually take this and tuck it into itself to give me some room to work. I can do the same with this duct here. I can tuck it into itself. Then I can make my connection. But once that's screwed and taped, I'm going to unravel this and unravel this. And you'll see that this meets together. I don't have to go downstairs and cut a strip out and come up here and have a wide seam or anything like that. This is already together. Now, if I did this and I can't slide my insulation any and I still have a small gap, like let's say I got something like this going on here, we would use just yellow filler on that. I would simply grab this, I would tear it, and I would just fill that gap. Just like that. I would probably use doubles. And I would gently cover that up. I'm just giving you examples of when things don't go exactly as planned. There's ways around to make them work. All right, so we went over wrapping 12-inch pipe, but how do I go about wrapping something that is wider than the sheet? Like 14-inch pipe takes a 54-inch pattern to wrap, and my sheet is only 48 inches long. So obviously I have to turn this and do it from the opposite way. So I'm gonna show you the method to do that. The first thing we're gonna do is I got a 10-foot stick of 14-inch pipe here, and unfortunately this coming in a 4-foot section, I'm gonna have 2 pieces of insulation and then a waste piece. You'll see what I'm saying. That waste piece we'll probably use on another piece of 14-inch duct, maybe, depending on the job we're working. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut 3 patterns for this one stick of pipe. I'm gonna have my 54 inches plus my 2-inch lip, so I'm gonna need to cut 56 inches off the sheet here. So I'm gonna give myself a mark there for 56. 56, connect the 2 together. You got a nice straight line. So I need another pattern, so I'm gonna go ahead and measure back 56. 56. We're gonna cut this, and then I'm gonna show you how to add a lip. The big thing with adding a lip is I wanna add all my lips on the same side. So, I'm gonna come here. I'm putting my scissors in between the vapor barrier and the fiberglass, and I'm cutting 2 inches out. This is my 2-inch lip. And I'm just gonna hold the fiberglass down here. I'm gonna grab this and pull it away. So there's my lip now that I'll be stapling into when I go to insulate this duct here. So I got one more pattern to cut. And I've already tested this pattern, so I know that it's gonna work, but if I had 100 feet of 14-inch pipe to wrap, I would go ahead and cut patterns for 100 foot of 14-inch pipe, but I would test my pattern at least one time before I went and cut a whole roll of insulation to find out it's the wrong size. Let me cut my last pattern here and we'll go ahead and get started. So I've got my patterns cut. Now I'm gonna turn this 90 degrees, and this lip here I'm gonna straighten out because this is actually gonna be hidden later. Turn this, and I'm actually gonna leave this pattern over top of the fiberglass on this pattern just a little bit. All right, so I got my pattern ready. I'm now gonna move my duct onto my pattern without sliding it. And I've been stepping all over this insulation. You can step on it. I probably shouldn't be as much as I have, but if you do step on it, try not to shift your foot, you know, because it's okay to do that. It's not okay to do this and twist. So I'm gonna take my duct here, and without shifting my pattern, I'm gonna lay the end of my pipe I'm trying to get to this gore right here, just like we did on the other 12-inch duct. If I don't make it when I first set it down, I can't just slide it here because I'll pull all my patterns. I have to actually pick it up, move it, and set it back down. So I'll move back over here, pick it up. All right, that's looking pretty close. So I'm now going to cut the other end. Just like with my other video, I'm cutting this about 1/4 inch past. So I'm just going to simply mark here. There's no need for me to measure. This lip here is the original lip that we used for the 12-inch pipe, but we've had to turn it because we're using a bigger duct size. So we've now created our own lip. So you can choose to completely cut this lip off. It's not needed. I leave it on, and I just think it looks cleaner in the end. You'll see when I get further along. But because this lip exists, I have to start with this pattern first, stapling it. With the 12-inch pipe, I started in the middle, and I rolled the pipe, and I grabbed the wrap, and then I rolled the pipe again, and I grabbed the lip. It's not really necessary to do that when you're doing 4-foot patterns because they're only 4 foot wide, and the material just comes with you, no problem. So I'm going to start at this end, and I'm going to start in the middle of this specific pattern size, and just like wrapping the 12, I'm going to pop 6 staples in the middle, and then I can let go. And then these short patterns are kind of difficult to make consistent without over tightening them. And then I'm going to, but the same thing. I'm going to start here and then work my way back, move up a little bit further, work my way back. Now you'll notice that you no longer have the guidelines when you're running the pattern this way. They're running the opposite direction. So at this point, you just got to know what you're doing. All right, so the reason I set this insulation over the section a little bit over here is so that there's some pressure when I go to wrap this, and a gap doesn't exist here when I'm done. You'll see what I'm saying. All right, so I think it's important to bring up, I made one minor error here, and I wasn't perfectly centered up when I started this pattern. It's only by 1/2 inch. It actually works well to show y'all what not to do. But if this was more extreme, then I would end up with a seam that started slanting here. This is such a minor amount that my 3-inch wide duct tape will still cover up that slant. You won't notice in the end. It's just something that you need to pay attention to. So this time, I'm going to check to make sure this is lined up before I start stapling. When you're wrapping with patterns, you can cut, this is the actual 1-inch lip that existed on the roll previously. You can choose to cut this off. I personally like to leave it on because when I'm taping this seam, a 3-inch tape seam is easy to cover this up. When it's just fiberglass on the edge, it could create a mild lump or something. This is getting into detail that's just a little excessive. If you want to cut the lip off, cut the lip off. I like to leave it on. I also reach in here to make sure that my fiberglass did in fact butt together here when I'm doing this. So you've got to, take your time and really pay attention to your material if you're going to leave it on. So I'm going to tape these seams first before I go back and tape the main seam where I stapled. And when I do that, I'm just gonna lay this duct tape on it. I'm not gonna, you know, press real hard. It's just gonna gently lay right on there. I'll come back and rub it in later. But see, because I did that with the lip, I was able to use one strip of tape and it's not gonna come loose. It looks a little ugly right now, but I'm gonna clean that up in a second. Now, if you wanna do a double here, you can. It's gonna get mastic anyways. So we could do doubles. Nice wide seam there. Does look a little cleaner. All right, so this double does look better, but my mastic seam is now going to be this wide versus a mastic seam here that is 3 inches shorter. Before I tape my top seam right here, I'm going to do just like I did in the last video, and I'm going to slap some of these ripples out, being very careful not to get too carried away to pull these two seams apart. And I'm going to tape my top seam again. Again, I'm laying the duct tape on it. I'm not pulling anything. And we'll squeegee that. All right, everyone, I hope you found this video helpful. There's a couple things I just wanted to recap on. Assembly line process is always important. Have a list of what you're gonna do and how much of it you're gonna do. Have your tools out, have your materials out before you start doing anything. Another tip would be to cut your insulation bag to where you have a trash bag for your material after you cut it. Test your pattern sizes. If you're gonna cut a lot of patterns going into assembly line process, test that pattern before you cut 20 of the wrong size pattern. Your scraps that you have left over from, you know, like this 14-inch pipe I left, I had a big 2-foot scrap left. So that scrap is for another section of 14-inch pipe. And if I have no more 14-inch pipe to wrap, that's gonna be what I'm gonna use for boots or, you know, some other fittings, elbows maybe. Another thing you always wanna remember is keep your seams lined up, you know, the seam of your pipe with the seam of your insulation. And when you're doing pattern insulation, you wanna keep your lips on the same side. All right, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. I'm Andrew with AGL Mechanical Tips, and remember, quality is your reputation.